Hello and welcome to the CFB Super Show. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85. Running a little late this evening. Sorry, going to the 9 p.m. hour. You know, that reminds me of college basketball. We come on at midnight Eastern when I get a little help from my guys, you know, Ace Stills and Mike and all that. So a little late night show here. So I don't expect a lot of you on here live, but if you are, thank you. Please make sure you are hanging out with me, talking in the chat. Hit the like button. If you're watching this on demand in the morning or throughout the day before the slates, please also hit the like button. Comment on the video. I definitely have that set up to where I can check and comment and talk with you there. You can always DM me or message me and reach out on Twitter at DubDeuce85, in the Discord on FTN, a myriad of ways to contact me. I have my phone, tablet, laptop on me at all times. They pretty much become part of my body. So if you reach out to me, I will answer rather quickly, especially on Discord. I am going to be covering tonight we're starting to get into, you know, midweek slates. It will only be a matter of time before Maction and the Fun Belt weekday slates start. We have college football on Thursday. We have college football on Friday, and of course, all day on Saturday. So a 3-game slate on DraftKings for Thursday, which I'm going to be covering that tonight. And I'm also going to be covering the 3-game slate for Friday. So 6 games in all that I'm going to talk about on tonight's show. Give you guys a little bit of, you know, game-by-game breakdown on the bigger slates lately. We've been doing the position-by-position thing. It's been okay for time. We've been, you know, kind of getting through it. But it really irks my flow, to be honest. I really do prefer the game-by-game thing. That's just me. I'm here to produce content that you guys like, enjoy, and can win money with. So if you still prefer the position-by-position thing on the bigger slates, that's what we'll continue to do. Jake Kuchek, my main man from San Francisco, will be with me tomorrow evening for the Saturday main slate breakdown. There will be articles out for all the slates, 3-gamer Thursday tomorrow morning, 3-gamer Friday morning. Of course, we'll have my main slate breakdown for Saturday, Friday, like mid-afternoon. And then Saturday mid-afternoon, I will be bringing you the night slate right up instead of Jake. Jake is taking the family on a vacation. He will be unavailable. You know, he wants to stay married and a happy life. So, you know, he can't be sitting there writing an article while he's on a family vacation. Definitely understand that. I would encourage him to you know, keep a happy wife, so he keeps that happy life. So I'll be doing that article in the Discord. I'll be doing the late night slate stuff. We continue to really do quite well and have at our most profitable with that late night slate, with that night slate from Jake. He does a good job writing that stuff up. We're just really smashing that. The main slates have been decent, some hit or miss stuff. We had some really good hits there. Blowouts are really just hurting us. You know, as conference play is beginning, we're going to really see some stuff level off. Clearly, like Dylan Gabriel, who was low owned, was on his way to a monster day, you know, at 55 yards rushing, a touchdown, over 200 yards, a couple touchdowns. Unfortunately, had 2 touchdowns called back due to stupid penalties. Game happens. Eric Gray ran those touchdowns in after. He could have potentially had a 5-touchdown day, playing just about 3.5 quarters in a blowout over lowly Nebraska. Such is life. Blowouts are part of it. PrizePicks going well. We'll be talking about some PrizePicks plays, props, betting stuff. I did release my betting article earlier today for my initial first lick, which covers 2 different games and a prop bet that I'm really quite high on. So we will be talking about all of that stuff. Again, if you're not part of the FTN, you know, site, Discord, all that good stuff, you can still use my code DUB. It's scrolling on the bottom there. Does get you 20% off for not only, you know, a duration of 1 year. So if you sign up for that annual, you'll get that 20% off the bulk amount. If you want to pay on a monthly amount, you do get 20% off your monthly sub. That will, I'm told, not continue. That's one of those things where right now you're kind of grandfathered into it and you'll continue to get it. And if you lock it in now, but that won't be a thing later on, like in a few months when you sign up, you'll get that first month off and then you won't get the discount anymore. So get yourself locked into that. Get in there for the college basketball content. You guys already know that's what most of you know me for. That's what I started with. College football has been good to us over the years. WNBA, FIBA, niche stuff is what I do. So let's make that money together and keep on dominating here. So I know the first couple of weeks we've had some really big slates, big games, big days. And then we've had a couple of days where it was like, man, these blowouts have really honestly hurt us quite bad. Charbonnet blowout, really, it wasn't even a blowout. Actually, the game was close. He didn't run it in, and South Alabama's defense went well. So that one didn't go the way we thought. Gabriel played well. Trey Palmer played extremely well. All the values did well. It was just the running backs who kind of let us down, unfortunately. Such is life. All right. So we're going to start with the Thursday 3-game slate, which contains West Virginia, Virginia Tech, Coastal Carolina versus Georgia State, and mighty Chattanooga Mocs versus Illinois. So 3 games here, 3 pretty decent games that we can look at. Going over it, let's pull up the game lines here on DraftKings. Starting with West Virginia. They are 1.5-point favorites. Total is about 50.5. I do believe that open with Virginia Tech being a bigger dog, somewhere between 2 to 3 points. I do like Virginia Tech from a betting standpoint. The West Virginia offense has been really quite good. Their defense is just terrible. And I think that, they're going to end up scoring a lot of points typically, but their defense isn't going to hold anyone. And Virginia Tech is kind of a Pandora's box. One week, Grant Wells looks like a Heisman candidate. Not really. In other weeks, he looks completely overmatched, totally terrible, can't play that well. He did look pretty well in that last game last week, but, it remains to be seen how he'll play here. Looking at prices, we'll start at quarterback for this game. JT Daniels at $7K, certainly a good price to look at for him. You see in competitive games versus Kansas and Pittsburgh, that is within, 2.5 touchdowns. He threw 40 pass attempts, blowout over Towson last week. He threw only 24, clearly wasn't needed. See, against Kansas, got into a shootout, threw over 350 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, 31 fantasy points. Against Pittsburgh, he wasn't quite as good. He attempted the 40 passes, only completed 23 for 214 and 2 touchdowns. Ford Wheaton is his number 1 option. He really is zeroing in on him a lot, and that's really just his guy. So that's, any pairing options that you want to talk about, it starts and stops with those two. But $7K is a solid price to pay for him. Grant Wells is there at 6'8". Definitely don't mind him. Again, this West Virginia defense really isn't impressing me by any means. They gave Jalen, who's turning out to be a really good quarterback, Jalen Daniels. I gotta give it up for him. He threw for 219 and 3 touchdowns against them, rushed for 85 yards. So he had a day. Towson, obviously, you can wipe that away. But looking at Pittsburgh and what they did, Kadon Slovis, he threw for over 300 yards and a touchdown as well. So Grant Wells is definitely going to have an opportunity to do quite well. Tech's still waiting to see, Malachi Thomas, if they can get him in there. Their run game has been a little stagnant without him, so they really would like to get him back. I don't have a lot of interest in Grant Wells for like main team purposes. I think he's like a 15 to 18 fantasy point guy. I'd much rather play JT Daniels if I'm going to run a quarterback from this game. At the running back spot, with Malachi still banged up, you're looking at Jalen Holston and Keshawn King basically kind of in a timeshare there, right? Holston 5.6K, Keshawn King 6K. As far as which one you're going to like, which one's going to be better to play, I think King at 6K is really our best bet. That week 1 game against Old Dominion, 19 carries, over 100 yards, got a little bit of an injury going on. He only had the 4 carries against Boston College, but he rushed for 64 yards. Like, he's playing extremely well. So we'll have to really see how that health is coming into the game. If he's not going to, if it comes out that he's not going to get the snaps or the carries or whatever, then obviously you want to look to Jalen Holston. I think people will probably go to Holston anyways, just because you look at it, he has 36 carries over the last 2 weeks, but you got to really, dig in a little bit further and can't mindlessly say, oh, this guy's getting all the carries. Why is that? okay, King's been hurt. Clearly, when both are healthy playing together, King's the guy, not Holston. Holston had the 5 carries against Old Dominion, 2.4 yards per carry. Against Boston College, 48 yards on 20 attempts. Then against Wofford, mighty Wofford, 16 carries. He had 66 yards, a 4.1 YPC. Anything under 5 is pretty tough. He has scored touchdowns in back-to-back weeks, which has made his fantasy total quite decent. But if you look at it here, and if we get that news that Kings, and I'm going to dig into that further, that'll be in the article tomorrow morning / today, depending on when you're watching this. King could be a nice bit of leverage for 400 more if people just mindlessly play Holston. It does seem like Malachi Thomas is going to be out for this week again, unless something miraculously changes. West Virginia had a hell of a running game last week. They faced off against a Towson team that was totally overmatched. Tony Mathis, who I really like, think he has a pretty bright future. Over 100 yards on 17 carries, 2 touchdowns. They want to get him more involved, definitely. It hasn't quite been the bell cow-esque backfield that we might have expected, seeing that they don't have a Letty Brown. They did run CJ Donaldson quite a bit. He had some carries there early on, but he's been really running the ball a lot. That DK has him listed as a wide receiver, but you see 9 carries for 101 yards last week, 3 touchdowns. The week before that against Kansas, he rushed 13 times for 48 yards, 2 touchdowns. The week before that, 7 carries for 125 yards and a touchdown. So you're getting a 4.3K wide receiver on DK who's clearly going to run the ball for them, split it with Mathis, and has a lot of pop. Both him and Mathis have a lot of Chris Tyree-esque speed, can break a 90-yard touchdown play with each touch. So I definitely have a lot of interest there, specifically in Donaldson, just because he's 4'3", and you know how I am about my 4 running back lineups. I could potentially run a 5 running back lineup. That sounds kind of sexy with him being a wide receiver. So definitely a fan of both. I would have to say that Mathis is probably going to draw a decent chunk of ownership. I'm curious to see what people do with Donaldson, just because he is taking a WR slot, and I would imagine people are going to go with Bryce Ford Wheaton because he's been just phenomenal. So I think we'll get a little bit of a leverage spot there with Donaldson. This may end up being a West Virginia stack because of their weapons being so good, but it just sucks because on the road against Virginia Tech, I have concerns that this game's going to hit the under, first of all, under 50, and be a little bit tougher for fantasy points to be scored. So I don't necessarily want to be stacking these guys up. If I do find myself playing 2-3 West Virginia, then I probably do have to come back around and play JT Daniels and hope for the best, or just play Mathis Donaldson, fade a chalky Wheaton, and hope that those guys are just going to run in all the touchdowns. At wide receiver, let's look at West Virginia first. Let's pull up targets. You'll have to excuse me. It has been a chaotic week. I have had sick kids, doctor appointments, a busy work week. For those who don't know, my day job is auctions, and I had an auction today close, which was part of the reason why I couldn't get on at 9 o'clock today, because it was running pretty late, and had to make that money. Got to make some money until I become a rich millionaire like Two Guns, who does football for us. All right, so target leaders for West Virginia: Bryce Ford Wheaton, 37, clearly the number one. Caden Prather with 22, Sam James 16. Sam James in week 1 was looking like he was going to push, Ford Wheaton as the WR1. Sam James 2 years ago was a PPR god. You guys might remember he was like 5 for 50 and a touch every single game. Then he had like 6 for 100 a bunch of games. And it looked like coming into the season, he was going to be back to that level, but he's kind of fallen back down by the wayside again. Prather is kind of coming up. And again, JT Daniels is just hyper laser beam focused on Bryce Ford Wheaton. So Wheaton at 7-1 it'd be a little pricey on maybe a full slate, 10 plus games, but on 3 games, that price is something that I'm willing to pay. And like I said, CJ Donaldson and Tony Mathis, targets, they're under 5 each. They're both running backs. Not sure why we're getting him at a wide receiver, but I'll take it with the touches that he's going to get. So Ford Wheaton is my primary wide receiver option at West Virginia. I think that if you're doing that, you're probably going to want to come back around and play JT Daniels, which is tough because, obviously Grayson McCall is going to be a lock, the chalkiest quarterback on this particular slate. We're going to talk about Coastal in a second. you have an 8.8K Tommy DeVito, which I'm not sure why you would want to do that. And then you have the decision of going with, Grant Wells, or down here to 5.8 to a guy who I really love in Darren Granger, who has been awesome this year. So I might run the double QB stack from that Coastal game. So it's a tough decision because I personally am not a big run back guy in college football. It's not something that I lose sleep over. I know that you can't make an NFL lineup without having the run back, although I have seen some winning lineups this year early for NFL that have not included these run backs. But clearly there's a spot for it, and it's a known winning strategy. I mean, that Miami game last week was, oh my God, right? You had to stack the hell out of that game. But in college, there's just so many opportunities for one wide receiver to get fed or one running back to do all the work that you could have two guys at the skill positions both go off for 20-plus fantasy points, and the QB still only score under 22 fantasy points. It happens literally all the time, every single week. So I don't feel JT Daniels is a necessity, but if you're one of those people that you have all these weapons, you can't live with yourself if you don't have them, please play them. Please do what your gut tells you to do and use them in that regard. For Virginia Tech, a lot less excited about their wide receivers. However, they're all cheap. It was nice to see last week Jadon Blue actually get into the action and produce well. But all these guys, Stephen Gosnell, Dwayne Lofton, Jaden Blue, Caleb Smith, they're all pretty bunched up. 1 week it will be, Mr. Blue. 1 week will be Caleb Smith. It's just, there's not a lot to like here. The running game gets going. Grant Wells really kind of just peppers everyone with targets. It's actually their tight end, Nick Gallo, who leads the team in targets with 19. And then you see Smith and Lofton with 12, Gosnell with 10. Connor Blumrick, who played some quarterback last year for them, at 9, Jadon Blue at 8, and then all the running backs like Holston and King are between 4 and 7. Now, Blue has been kind of just, he's a stud back in, 2019 for Temple, and he had some injuries, kind of fell off, had some more injuries, fell off, and now coming into this season with Virginia Tech, new hope for him. First couple games were kind of, whatever. But this last game, it was nice to see he was targeted 6 times against Wofford, caught 4 of those for 61 yards and a touchdown. So I have hope for him because this is a guy that was an 1,100-yard receiver back in 2019 with Temple. Temple's quarterback play has always been suspect. 95 receptions. He was targeted 144 times in 2019. Injuries have robbed him. I hate seeing a kid lose their talent. Maybe not their talent, but their explosiveness and their ability to get open because of injuries, and that's really been the case with Jadon Blue. So I don't particularly like the idea of playing any of their receivers. For me, it's really just running, as long as he's good, Keshawn King for less ownership. That's where I'm kind of leaning and predicting that Holston's going to draw more of that ownership. So that's the West Virginia Tech game. There's some of you are hanging out with me. Let's go. David Deerham asks lineup questions. Yes, always. If you're here live watching the show with me, hanging out late, I am doing this for you guys. I mean, I like listening to myself talk. I don't mind it, although I'm kind of weird. I won't watch the shows later. I don't know if this is a weird thing for other guys. I need to ask some of the other hosts. I refuse to watch on-demand shows of myself. It's not only kind of weird and pompous, but I just hate this. I hate the sound of my voice. But yes, if you're watching this live with me and hanging out, I like talking with people. Especially when I'm doing a solo thing. So yes, David, you can certainly ask lineup questions for tonight's or tomorrow's slate, Friday's slate. If you want to ask something for Saturday, I haven't fully dived into that. I've obviously looked at it. I can ask about that as well. Got my man Braden Hoffman in here. Says Donaldson season. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Let's get it. But absolutely, there's a Q&A show on Saturday morning at 8 a.m. Pacific as well, where I do answer, this or that questions, injury stuff, prize picks, props as well. So if this is your first time here, Mr. David, thank you. Welcome. And definitely feel free to fire off your questions. I will answer those throughout the show. All right, moving on to the next game, this Coastal Carolina versus Georgia State game. This is the creme de la creme of the slate. This will be the absolute just jam-packed, stack of this 3-gamer. We're going to see a lot of overlap here. It has a 62 total. You're looking at West Virginia game with a 50.5 total. You're looking at Illinois game with a 39 total. So obviously we're going to chase that high total. That's just what you do. I don't necessarily believe in doing that as just like, I got to play everyone from this high scoring game on full slates. But when you're looking at a low scoring or a smaller slate like this, it just makes too much sense, right? Especially when you're looking at Illinois versus Chattanooga, that has like just grinded out 21-3 written all over it. And it's going to be a lot of Chase Brown, who everyone's going to play. I'm going to play him. You got to play him. And then, that stack of Coastal, and then, probably Ford Wheaton from West Virginia. That's going to be the popular lineups for this particular slate. It is -2 for Coastal Carolina. I do like them even on the road. Like them to cover that and win outright against Georgia State. Although Georgia State is a really good team offensively, and they're okay defensively. Their offense is able to keep up with a lot. There's going to be a ton of fun going on in the Sun Belt this year, the Fun Belt, as I like to call it. But they were in the game with North Carolina, 35-28. They were in the game with Charlotte. Charlotte got Chris Reynolds back last week. He was injured. They've been dealing with several injuries. Without Reynolds, they're an absolute garbage team. With Reynolds, they're actually a bowl caliber team. You see, they beat them 42-41 last week. My man Chris Reynolds threw for 405. Great to see him healthy. But Darren Granger threw for 343 and 4 himself. So Granger, as a quarterback, threw 34 times against Charlotte. Charlotte's defense is pretty bunk. They're not good at all. And Georgia State's actually 0-3, but their offense is a lot better, and they're a lot better team than their record shows. They've held their own against South Carolina, North Carolina, and Charlotte. They're on the North Carolina tour. Tucker Gregg, running back for them, rushed for 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, and then Jamari Thrash just went nuts. He thrashed it, literally 10 catches for 213 yards and a touchdown. So those are the Georgia State guys to really know. Starting at quarterbacks in this game, I mentioned Grayson McCall briefly, but let's start with Granger. It's only 5'1". Or 5'8", sorry. That's just way too cheap for him going into this game. If Coastal, they're going to strike early, they're going to run the ball effectively, they're going to go up, 14 to 17 points in that first half. That's what Coastal does. Then they kind of let teams back in. This has kind of been their thing for the last 2 or 3 seasons, that they've had McCall and been this really fantasy darling of a squad. So Granger is going to throw the ball a lot. He's going to have the opportunity to rack up some points, and they're going to score. This Coastal defense isn't a lockdown juggernaut unit just yet, like they have been in the past. So Darren Granger at 5'8", that's a really, really hard fade for me. I don't know that I am disciplined enough to make it. I will make some tough fades gladly and love to beat my chest about it, even when it doesn't work. But I don't know that there's any upside to fading Granger at 5'8". I think in your GPP lineups, you play JT Daniels instead, but in your cash, single entry, high dollar, stuff like that, Granger's an obvious choice. There's classic pricing error here from early season DK. He's thrown for over 600 yards, 8 touchdowns to 2 interceptions, just a really solid mark. The game against North Carolina, he was really solid as well. 3 touchdowns. The yardage wasn't great at 186, but he rushed for 75. And that's where Granger's upside really comes from. You see 54 yards, 75, and 43 on the ground. So true dual threat quarterback who is going to rack it up on the ground and through the air, and has enough weapons around him, so the defense has to really account for not only him, but the other options around him as well. So easy option, somebody you got to play. At running back for Georgia State, Tucker Gregg at 4'8" is pretty interesting. They have Jamius Williams as well. Jamius has been around for a while, but Tucker Gregg's been around for a really long time too. And he's a guy that I think at 4'8" can easily have 2 touchdowns kind of stat line. Maybe not have the yardage like he did last week, but he's a good guy that they're going to give the ball in the goal line area, and he's just a tough kid. He's like 5'10", 220, 230, something like that. He's really kind of pretty tough on the tough yardage. 3 games, he's rushed for over 200 yards to 2 touchdowns. Last year, 953 yards, 9 touchdowns. 468 yards, 6 touchdowns the year before that when they had a committee at Georgia State. So he's a really consistent runner and somebody that you can rely on, and that price point is definitely somebody that I feel comfortable playing. They just haven't really, like I said, defensively been winning games, but we don't care about that in fantasy. Janius has rushed for 164 yards, no touchdowns yet. That's on 35 carries. So between him and Greg has got 52 carries to Williams 35. So not quite a committee situation, but they're both going to get work. And then you throw Darren Granger in the mix as well. So I would normally be on a guy like Williams as kind of a sneaky play, but Greg as the starter is only 300 more. Don't really need to get too cute there, do we? And then at wide receiver, I mentioned Jamari Thrash, 5K. That's a misprice. This is another player that we're stacking up. We're going to be definitely running Granger with his number one option and possibly with Greg. 3 guys. This is a spot where I'm fine going running back, wide receiver, and quarterback. Some people don't like doing that in college. Running backs get there too, or there's a lot of pass catching backs. You can stack those guys up and it works out more than it does in the NFL. Thrash leads the team with 31 targets, 20 catches, 337 yards, and a touchdown. Remember, he had over 200 last game, so a lot of that came from that. Robert Lewis, 21 targets, 11 catches, 189 yards, 4 touchdowns. He was getting it in before Thrash. Chris Bird, their tight end, has 9 targets, 5 catches, 22 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Red zone guy that they look at a lot. Bigger target, that is definitely going to be, if you're multi-entering, a guy to look at. Hardly anyone will be on him, and he has a lot of touchdown equity. But obviously, Jamari Thrash is your main go-to guy here. All right, Grayson McCall at 8K. They at least did a good job of pricing him up somewhat to where you can't just, mindlessly play him. You do still need to mindlessly play him because there's not really any other quarterbacks on the slate to make up those points. So you can feel free and feel good about playing McCall with Granger. He has over 700 yards in the 3 games, a 71% completion rate, which is phenomenal considering that Isaiah Likely, the monster tight end, is off to the NFL playing for the Ravens. He was like 153 touchdown guy every game. And then Javon Hiley, who I know left for the NFL. I think he's a practice squad guy now, but 900 plus yard receiver. Losing those 2 weapons, you would have thought that they lean on the run game more, or McCall's efficiency would go down, and it really hasn't through 3 games. 71% is damn good considering who his weapons are. He also has 53 rushing yards and a touchdown. He's a semi-dual threat guy. He hasn't really shown it yet. He has been kind of sacked a lot, even though his opponents have been Army, Gardner-Webb, and Buffalo. But he is definitely a guy who can get it down on the ground, so don't sleep there. At running back, the Coastal Carolina running back situation was just totally frustrating last year, right? With Reese White, they had 2 or 3 guys from a week-to-week basis. You'd play one of the running backs, and it'd be the other one who rushes for 3 touchdowns without fail. It was easily one of the most tilting, if not the most tilting thing in college football DFS. That was between Reese White, Shamari Jones, who is gone now, but you see Jones rush for 1,000 yards and 13 touchdowns, Reese White 515 and 7, and then Braden Bennett, who was the RB3, rushed for 636 and 7. So really just pulling your hair out with that. Reese White's back. He's in the mix. Braden Bennett has been out. He hasn't played yet. He is trending out. He's doubtful right now. Don't expect to see him. One guy that they were going to use heading into the season, Aaron Bedgood, he's hurt and doubtful, so that's another one we can roll out. So it's really down to 2 running backs, and Reese White, who we know is going to get work, even though he only had the 2 carries against Buffalo last week. One of them was for 67 yards, which is pretty damn good. And then CJ Beasley, who has been getting a lot of work, man. Like they've been working him in early, and he's going to be a guy that really factors in and kind of takes that Shamari Jones role, with White kind of being more that short yardage guy at times and a guy that's going to pilfer touchdowns. Now, Beasley only has the 1 rushing touchdown, but he does have 1 receiving touchdown, and his best game came against Buffalo last week. 89 rush yards on 9 attempts, a very tasty 9.9 YPC, and 3 receptions for 74 yards with a 59-yarder in there that also went for a touchdown. So CJ Beasley at 4.2 is a guy that I'm certainly feeling pretty confident in. But knowing what we went through with Coastal and their running backs last year, very easily could be a situation where I play Beasley and White scores 3 times. I could go up and play White and Beasley scores 3 times. No matter what decision you make between the 2, I'm here to tell you, in a depressing manner, as depressing as you can possibly imagine, you're going to get this right back spot wrong between them. So I would just take the cheaper one, depending on your build. At wide receiver for Coastal, again, their options are not as sexy as last year. I mean, the last 2 years, McCall's really had some great wide receivers. His number one wideout is Sam Pickney at the moment. Former Georgia State guy, so he's, transferred over this year, so he's going to be looking for some revenge there. He was 4 years at Georgia State. The WR2, WR3 for them quite a bit, but he leads the team in targets for 25, 15 catches for 259 yards, and a touchdown. Tyson Mobley has caught 8 of his 9 targets for 96 yards, 3 touchdowns. He's been the touchdown god so far. Jared Brown, 9 catches on 12 targets for 124 yards. So a totally revamped and new group that we're looking at here. Last year, Jared Brown was on the team, but didn't really factor in because he had such good weapons in front of him. They're asking him to do more. And then Tyson Mobley, who has been really good touchdown equity so far. Again, a very little used option over the last 2 years for Coastal, now getting his chance. So they have that continuity and that relationship with Grayson McCall from before, but he still chooses to pepper the transfer instead. So Pickney is the guy if you want a wide receiver from this group. I don't see why you wouldn't. He's 6'5". Price point is a little tough for me. I think leverage wise, Tyson Mobley at 5'5" is a little more interesting, or all the way down to 4'4" for a guy like Jared Brown. But you're going to be dealing with a real shot of bageling or having sub 5 fantasy points if you mess around with Jared Brown. So just be advised of that. Pinkney is going to be the guy that guaranteed to get targets. 6'5" is a fine price. I think if you're going to go there, then you drop down from Reese White and you play Beasley instead, because there's some other options with Wheaton from West Virginia that I feel like I have to have in my lineup. Chase Brown, I have to have in my lineup, so I've got to, be a little bit more picky with some of these plays for lineup purposes and salary purposes, because I don't have the salary cheat code like Two Guns has. That's two Guns references on the show. I know he doesn't watch it, but shout out to Two Guns, the millionaire winner. All right, so I'd rather play Jamari Thrash at 5K. You can play both of them, of course. This game is going to be super chalky. If I haven't made that clear yet, this game is going to be super chalky. Now you know. All right. Who to pair with Granger, Thrash, and then was Reese White benched because of his 2 fumbles last game? Very well could be. I didn't see an injury for him when I was looking at the Coastal Carolina message board. And yes, I do look at teams' message boards. You can count on me as your content provider to look around and check that out. Most likely, the 1 fumble was real dangerously close to making Buffalo win the game, which would have been embarrassing considering Buffalo lost to Holy Cross the week before. But I mean, looking at their shares, I actually have that cool thing that I was showing you guys in the Discord last week with carry percentages and stuff like that. Let me go to Coastal. Give me a second here. All right. So throwing that, even before that, 2 carry game, they were right around a 43-39, split with Bennett, because Bennett hasn't played yet, and Nate Hope's gotten 4% of the carries. 4% of the carries. Beasley, 40% of the team's rushing yards. White, 43%. They're both right around 48% of the team's carries, so they're damn near a split at this point, with Nate Hope getting 4.5%. Total carries for both is 35 each. The 2013 2, but before that it was 20-19 in week 1, so Beasley only was outtouched by 1. Then week 2 was 13-7, so a little bit more of a gap, right? But still within 6, and Beasley's catching passes as well, where Reese White really isn't. And I'm getting a almost 1K discount or so that's why I'm looking at Beasley. But White's going to be a guy that is going to get those short yardage touchdowns, and as I mentioned, those two, White and Shamari, they just took turns terrorizing DFS community last year. So we'll have to see how that works out. I might just actually avoid it altogether, depending on how my build looks. But as of right now, I want CJ Beasley. And I have a feeling that White's going to be more popular just because of his name, and people that aren't paying attention to Coastal Carolina football yet are not even going to know who CJ Beasley is. All right, last game on this particular slate is Chattanooga, the Mighty Mocs. Their basketball team was awesome this last year. against Illinois. Illinois is 18-point favorites. The total is 39, so you can expect a lot of ball control offense and running the ball from Illinois. They're not Iowa level bad of neglecting offense. They actually have some receivers who can make plays, and they will throw the ball. But they're just very content to run the clock out, and move the chains and just have these very long possessions that end in a field goal or a rushing touchdown. That's fine. It's not so great for DFS purposes, of course, which means we want to look immediately at Chase Brown, who is sitting there at 6'9". No disrespect to Tommy DeVito, but 8'8" is that'll be the day that I'm paying 8'8" for Tommy DeVito. Now, he is playing against an opponent that he can definitely do some damage against. He was asked against Wyoming to throw the ball 37 times, but he still, on 37 pass attempts, had less than 20 fantasy points. And then in a decent week 2 matchup against a Virginia team that, can't defend anyone, threw it 25 times, threw 2 touchdowns, but still didn't hit 20 fantasy points. So can't ask me to pay this 8.8 price tag for him. It's really tough. I can't imagine doing it. I don't think anyone else will do it either. There'll be some ownership. I mean, I'm not saying he's going to be 0%, of course, but she's sub 15. And unless he's going to run some touchdowns in, I don't think he's going to get there. Chase Brown, as I mentioned, a very obvious play at 6'9". He needs to probably be priced close to like Mo Ibrahim level, 9-10K. So until that happens, you can expect heavy ownership. I'm actually kind of happy that Illinois is not on the main slate this week, because I'm getting really sick and tired of him being mispriced and being 1,000,000% owned on these large slates. So on a smaller slate, I can take his 85% ownership and feel just fine about it. That's what's going to happen. Looking at it, he's had games of 151 rushing yards, 146 rushing yards. He's just been phenomenal. He's going to get massive work, 20 plus carries, even before this one gets out of hand. I don't really need to even say too much more about it. Was it the game against Indiana? Let's see. He had 36 for 199. So big workload there. Going against Virginia, which we really liked him, 20 for 148. So a big performance there. And then against Wyoming, again, he had 19 carries for 151 yards. So we can expect 100 plus, 25 plus carries. If it gets out of hand really quickly, then he'll see less. But at this point, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to jam him into the lineup and move on. Wide receiver, you're looking at a bunch of GPP guys. Isaiah Juice Williams is exciting, but they've got him priced appropriately at 7.7. He's going to need to do a little bit of everything, and he has that capability and has done it. He gets carries. He does return work at times, gets targets. Hasn't really had that big blow-up game necessarily just yet, but let's pull up the Illinois targets so we can see. They've actually had some other guys who have played quite well, guys like Brian Hightower, Pat Bryant, who have, like I said, played quite well. Now, Williams has been getting a ton of targets, a lot of short yardage targets, actually. 29 leads the team, 19 catches for 157 yards and a touchdown. Hightower has 14, Pat Bryant has 11, and then their tight end, Tip Ryman. Tip Ryman's a hell of a name, by the way. 9 targets, 5 catches, 42 yards, and a touchdown. Williams was dealing with some early season injuries that he suffered against Wyoming, but the game against Indiana, he was really peppered hard, 15 targets. He caught 9 of those for 112, so that was a bigger game for him. But you see, 9 targets against Wyoming, 5 against Virginia. He's going to be involved. But really just get Chase Brown in there and then worry about these guys for GPP purposes only, in my opinion. All right. On the Chattanooga side, wide receivers are all sub 4K. They will have to throw the ball, of course. I don't want to. I mean, their offense has been good, but let's keep in mind they've played Wofford, they played Eastern Illinois, they played North Alabama. They're in the Southern Conference, so this is a tough one for them. They do have Preston Hutchinson. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that name, but he was a Maction god for a while. He played for Eastern Michigan. So they do have a guy, a capable pass, signal caller, and a guy who has some dual threat upside there. So it could be interesting with Preston Hutchinson. Running back, Aleem Ford. He had a game against Wofford rushing over 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, so it was an interesting weapon. Sam Phillips has been their WR1. While Elling Ford has been a pass catcher out of the backfield. He had a game of 20 carries, 73 yards, 2 touchdowns, several games of 2 to 3 targets where he's catching 22-yard passes. So there's something to like there, and Preston Hutchinson is finding him to a degree. It's just a really tough matchup for them going up against Illinois, and his rushing opportunities probably aren't going to be as great because they've had big leads against these other FCS opponents, which has led to more carries. So really Sam Phillips is the guy that you're going to want to look at. Maybe Keshawn Toney. They're all cheap, but none of them are necessarily exciting. I think for GPP purposes at 4-1, Aleem Ford is interesting because of his pass catching ability. And I certainly want to get some exposure. We saw some FCS teams with their running backs last week do quite well, actually. What was it? The Arizona game. Let's pull that up. It was Lupker, I think is how you pronounce that. That was a guy that in the Discord kind of talked about heading into that late night slate because North Dakota State, had a chance to beat Arizona, and they almost did. It was 28-31. But Hunter Lupka, 18 carries for 115, 2 touchdowns. And then he caught 3 passes for 65 yards and a touchdown. And Liam Ford has a similar role in the offense for this Chattanooga squad. So, and they're one of the better FCS squads. So it's definitely intriguing to a degree. I wish they were instead. I wish they were the ones playing West Virginia. I think that would be a hell of a lot more interesting. But we'll see. It's definitely worth looking at Liam Ford at that cheap price. And then Preston Hutchinson at 5-1. He was good at Eastern, honestly. He had his moments, and he had that group of wide receivers that are really talented there. You see he's got games over 278 yards in his last 2, but he's not doing that against Illinois. So GPP shot if you want, but he's definitely not a guy that I'm starting my lineups with when I have Granger there at 5-8. So 3-man core, really obvious here, right? So Grayson McCall, you gotta use him. At running back, Chase Brown. I'm taking all the expensive guys. God, I'm so lame on this slate, I know. And then my core wide receiver has to be Chamari Thrash at 5K. I could see a bit of a letdown game here after last game, but that price tag has to suck me in and game stack galore. Obviously, the real obvious option is Bryce Ford Wheaton, but another one of the most expensive players on the slate. So we have the value to fit those, Wheaton, Chase Brown, and Grayson McCall. We've got the value. I really, really, really like Donaldson for West Virginia. He's going to get me in some trouble because at 4-3, I don't think people are going to play him. And the fact that he's not going to cost me a running back slot is just way too appealing. I don't know how anyone can get away from him, but I bet he's going to see like sub 15% ownership. And you know me with my leverage plays, I'm all over that. All right. Let's talk. We'll talk PrizePicks at the end. So that's that slate. Let's go into Friday and talk about the Friday set of games. All right. Which is even more egregious pricing some places. And we have a game that's kind of meh, but we also have a game that's really exciting. So Virginia, Syracuse, Nevada Air Force, and UTEP versus Boise State. So see that Syracuse game, exciting. The Air Force game is kind of meh, and then the UTEP game is agreeable. Looking at it, the first game on that particular slate, Virginia versus Syracuse, total 54. I think there's potential for that to sail over. Syracuse is 9-point favorites at the moment. We know that I have an affinity for Brennan Armstrong. He didn't pan out for us on that last main slate. Neither did the chalk guy of Mike Wright, but he's back, and I'm still interested. The price tag of 6.6 is still way too cheap to not. He has dual threat upside. He can score rushing touchdowns. He can rack up a little bit of rushing yards. And then we know he has some tremendous weapons around him. We saw against ODU that really was, kind of showed that he could play well. It didn't have a great fantasy score, but 284 passing yards. He rushed for 54 yards. Just a reminder that he has these capability to do so. I think against Richmond, people weren't really, thinking of it too much, like 105 rushing yards against Richmond. Well, big deal. Anyone could do that, but he has the ability to do that against Syracuse here as well. And I think that seeing what Malik Cunningham just did I think that there's potential for him to mirror that, bring him up because he was in a similar situation. Syracuse didn't play that well, had a nice game against UCF, bounced back. I think the Syracuse defense is being talked about as an elite unit a little bit too much. I don't really agree with it. I think that we need to pull the brakes a little bit, and as they hit into conference play here, we're going to see them give up more points. So I think Brennan Armstrong's going to play well here, and I don't know how owned he's going to be. It was nice to see Aiden O'Connell just straight devour them with 424 yards and 3 touchdowns. Not saying Brennan Armstrong's going to do that, but he certainly has that in his bag. He has thrown for 350, 400 yards before. He's only 6'6". He's playing a Syracuse team that's vastly, in my opinion, overrated. So Brennan Armstrong is a guy that I'm looking at. I'm not probably interested in the running backs too much. Paris Jones, their RB1, has looked very solid this season, but I'm really banking on Armstrong to take the rushing touchdowns away. So I don't really want to get involved with him. It's really Armstrong and some of his weapons. And that is, the main guys, Dontavian Wicks, who is underpriced at $6K, Keaton Thompson, who's probably fairly priced at 5'8", but the best overall fantasy option on the receiving groups because of his ability to take carries, get short yardage, get long passes. He does a little bit of everything. Lavelle Davis as that value there at 4'6". Those are your 3 main guys to really look at. Pulling up targets for Virginia. Let's do that. Wicks currently leads the team with 37 targets. The next closest is 24. So Wicks is clearly being peppered by Armstrong, but he had a game against Illinois where he was targeted 13 times. I know because I played him as my pairing partner with Brennan Armstrong during that slate. 13 targets. You'd think, oh, wow, I'm really happy about that. He did well. Well, he had 2 catches for 23 yards, and I did watch most of that game. He had targets, I guess you could call them that, within 3 to 5 yards, but it wasn't as if he could catch them unless you wanted to turn into, Megatron reincarnate and reach out and go gadget extra arms or something. Those were not going to be catchable targets. So you do see he followed it up against Old Dominion with another 12 targets, but he had 4 catches. So the catchable balls coming his way aren't great. It's to be expected at times because Armstrong typically goes deep when he's throwing to Dontavian Wicks. I think he'll see a lot of ownership because of that high target share. I do want to kind of coast myself over to Keaton Thompson, who I just prefer. I think he's just a guy that, is more, I don't want to say more dangerous than Wicks because Wicks is going to get those long touchdown opportunities, but he's just going to get more work, whether that's carries, short yard situation, working out the slot. He's going to have an opportunity to take jet sweeps. Like they haven't been giving him the carries this year as much as the past, but he's definitely a guy that's going to get work. And I just, we saw against ODU, if they're going to pay all this defensive attention to Wicks, he's going to burn them. 9 catches for 118 yards. He's just a very slept-on option. Lavelle Davis is a very good, consistent, and now healthy value option. Somebody who's going to get you 2 to 4 catches and somewhere between 40 to 75 yards at 4.6. We can definitely do well with that. It also helps, at least those guys, that Billy Kemp is doubtful, dealing with an illness. I did not see any practicing from him the last couple of days when I did look that up. So I'll definitely be updating that as the week goes on. But with Kemp kind of trending out, he'd be a hell of a play at 3.6. We can certainly look at Wicks, Thompson, and Davis as the main options here and roll one of them with Brennan Armstrong here. On the Syracuse side, we can expect to see a lot of ownership on Garrett Schrader. 7.8 is a better price than what he just was, but still far too low for this revamped offense that is asking him to pass more. His rushing upside is still there, even though he's been, 25, 23, and 29 attempts, which doesn't sound like a whole hell of a lot. Schrader's a guy who was low 19, 20 pass attempts a lot at certain times last year because he ran the whole game, and so did Sean Tucker. But you're looking at 16, 13, and 17 rushing attempts as well. So they're still giving him that opportunity. And as long as he's going to be rushing that many times, he's just an auto play up to like 9K on these slates. So expect 90% silly ownership because he's basically locked into a 30 fantasy point floor because of his rushing upside. Oh, yeah, and Virginia is giving up last year, I talked about all the time, over 225 rushing yards. They're down to 150 rushing yards this season through 3 games. but don't let that fool you that they're becoming some sort of solid rushing unit. That's only because the game against Old Dominion was so ugly, and Hayden Wolf threw the ball almost 40 times. Blake Watson did rush 21 times. He only had the 70 yards. He's had a terrible season for Old Dominion. In fact, Old Dominion's offense has looked terrible. Their offensive line has been terrible. Zach Kuntz has struggled as a tight end, although he had 683 and a touchdown last week. Could have used that in week 1, huh? So don't let that, them think that they're suddenly going to be some shutdown unit. Against Chase Brown, we already mentioned he rushed for 146. Against the Richmond Spiders, who are a much better basketball team, they gave up to 2 different running backs 76-plus yards. The great Aaron Dykes and Savon Smith, who are both good players. So what do you think that guys like Schrader and Tucker are going to do against this Virginia defense? They're going to tear it up. So Schrader is your guy there. At running back, if you can afford Tucker at 9-1, I think it's a 3-game slate. You need to find a way to afford Tucker. We've been able to get away from him on the bigger slates and those secondary slates. I actually didn't even have the salary to play him against Purdue last week, and that worked out. I got super lucky. He was shut down on the ground. He's been really heavily involved in the passing game, but no touchdowns means no fantasy points for Sean Tucker, and we got away with it. This week, we're definitely not fading him against that Virginia rush defense because he's going to crush them. I mean, easily. So we're paying up for him there. Really, the fact that Tucker is so involved, like Schrader's passing attempts are up, but a lot of those attempts are going to Tucker, which has made his fantasy value that much better. He leads the team in targets with 18. He's got 12 of them for 124 and a touchdown. So he's been really quite good there. Expect him and Schrader to be on majority of the lineups you go up against in cash, WTAs, high dollar, any of that stuff. At wide receiver, it's a little easier to kind of just get away from them. They're very spread out. Routes ran seems to favor Aronde Gadsden. That was a name that we had mentioned on Saturday morning, just kind of late, like, hey, somebody had asked about a Schrader pairing partner, and Gadsden was the one that I was kind of interested in. And as in, like, not interested really at all, but if you forced me to play a Syracuse wide receiver, it was him. And he did well. 6 catches, 112 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Now, it could very easily go back and be Courtney Jackson this time. Adams, DeMarcus Adams, like any of these guys. And the fact that Gadsden's up to 6'4" is a pretty big turnoff overall for me personally. I don't want to, pay that for him. I'd rather go down and just play Courtney Jackson, who's more of a known name. As somebody that, has been around and can definitely produce. And he's only 3'8". So as a value guy there, that's who I'd personally like to look at. He is 4th on the team with 10 targets, but his catch rate's quite high at 70%. He's got 7 of those, 98 yards and a touchdown. Gadsden's got 14 targets, Devon Cooper 11, Isaiah Jones 8, and then their tight ends are Maximilian Mang, which is, again, a great name, is all the way down to 2 targets. So you're looking at Gadsden, Jackson, or perhaps Devon Cooper if you want a pairing partner for Schrader. But really, it's just play Tucker and Schrader and move on. Play Armstrong and one of his receivers, and you have yourself a really nice-looking start to the slate. Nevada versus Air Force. This is a triple option. The academy schools are always difficult to really watch, the way they play. And they're sometimes difficult to peg. Army is one of the worst for that. They've got a million different guys they give carries to. I'd say as far as academy schools go, triple option teams go, Air Force is the most predictable. And they're still not that predictable outside of maybe one guy. They are 24-point favorites against Nevada. Nevada loses their coach, loses their quarterback, multiple wide receivers transferred out. They're a terrible program this year, which is tough. Toatawa is still there. Devon Lee is still there. So their running game is still strong, but they're going to have to pass the ball because Air Force is going to choke the life out of this game. And if they can build a 14-point lead, it might as well be a 50-point lead because they're going to just run the clock out. Total is 46. On the Air Force side, we'll start there on the obvious spot. At quarterback, you have Hazik Daniels at 6'2". He's a guy that I definitely have some interest in here for GPP purposes. Again, though, Brennan Armstrong for 400 more. Like, let me get all of that. Daniels is not going to be asked to throw the ball too much in this offense because it is the triple option and they run a lot. Now, he did rush for 107 yards against UNI, but his carries have been down since, and he hasn't had much success. The Wyoming game was quite ugly. I think this one could be more like the game against Colorado where they got out to a big lead and then he just handed it off the whole time. So I don't have a ton of interest in him outside of maybe a GPP just because we know that he can rush for 100 plus and multiple touchdowns. I just don't want to rely on him if I can help it. At running back, there's two main names to really know for the Air Force side. One being Brad Roberts, who is just, the bell cow extraordinaire because of the work he gets, but they give carries to a lot of other guys, but he's going to get a lot of carries in this offense. 24 a couple weeks ago, he had 16 against Wyoming last time out, which was a surprise. He actually was a bust during that one. I expect him to be fed a lot more in this particular game. Air Force had a couple of guys out. They kind of struggled in that Wyoming game. Things didn't go to plan. His main primary backup in the offense there, not even really a backup, because on the field a lot, he was the H spot, John Lee Eldridge there at 5'7". Roberts is 8'4", so if you want a guy in Eldridge who's going to get anywhere between 8 to 14-ish carries and has a really nice YPC against three very different opponents, his YPC is right around 10. 8 carries for 85 yards against UNI, 8 carries for 88 yards against Colorado, and then 13 carries for 104 yards against Wyoming. UNI, a respectable lower division team. Colorado, terrible, not respectable. Rush defense as bad as 2021 Missouri. If you remember, they gave up like 500 rushing yards a game. And then Wyoming, who is a bumbling offense, but an adequate enough defense, and they have a good enough running back that they can make games ugly and win, which is what they just did. But Eldridge has produced in all. I think that people are going to try to go up to Roberts. Roberts and Tucker together is going to usurp a ton of salary. Quarterbacks are cheap enough to where you can do so, but I like Eldridge as kind of a GPP look at that 5'7", where he's going to be a guy that people just don't use. And then we get these guys like Emmanuel, Michelle, who's 5 to 8 carries, and they've got fullbacks and that, but it's really Roberts or Eldridge you want to rely on. I was disappointed going into the last Air Force slate. My man Dane Kinnaman had to sit out of last Friday's game with Wyoming. They just had that short slate. He had that spectacular 80-yard touchdown catch and a 71-yard touchdown rush. He's only 4-1. Depending on his status, I have not seen a updated practice report since Tuesday. What is today? One day. So I don't know that he's practicing just yet. Same thing with DeAndre Hughes. Those were two guys that had to sit out in that last game. Two of the more important weapons in this offense for receivers because they're going to get carries. Kinnaman is a guy who was getting 2 to 5 carries. David Cormier, he gets carries. Hughes has gotten carries. I think he has 7 for the season. So all these guys are going to get work and they're cheap, and there'll be an opportunity for them to catch screens and other passes. So I love Kinnaman. I'm a big fan of his. We'll have to see if he actually goes. I don't expect ownership to be anywhere close to, double digits on any of these guys. You do have Ben Jefferson at 3K. You do have Kyle Patterson at 3K, two guys who, got into the action a little bit more, I guess, with Kinnaman out. Patterson had 3 catches for 32 yards last week, so that's basically a 8 for 120 in a normal offense. Definitely don't hate using him if we get the news that the other guys like Kinnaman are out. And then Ben Jefferson, who had a 48-yard carry against Colorado, which everyone should have a 48-yard carry against Colorado. So some GPP looks here if you're looking to get different in some of your other builds. Nevada runs just trash at the quarterback spot. I never like to say that about these college kids. I want to respect them. I want to have I had some interviews that fell through earlier last month. So I want to be on the up and up with these kids. But Shane Illingsworth at quarterback is just, it's an abomination. It's got to stop. Nate Cox is a better option. But they went back to him as the backup after he threw for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, granted, he did that against Incarnate Word, and they lost that game against Incarnate Word, a Cam Wardless Incarnate Word squad, which is a FCS championship caliber squad. He also had a rushing score. So, he did pretty well and he looked good. So I would have liked to have seen him against Iowa. They went back to Mighty Illingworth and he just did what he does, which is complete 50% of his passes, get sacked 8 times, and not throw any touchdowns. So quarterback for the Nevadas is a complete just ignore. There's no way. Devontae Lee at 4K is interesting. Toa at 6'2 is playable. Both of those guys are getting majority of the touches for the Nevada side. They don't have any other weapons. So I think Toa is an absolutely fine, cash game / single entry type guy. Devontae Lee, a nice, value running back that should see way less ownership, but is capable of punching it in, for 1 to 2 touchdowns pretty easily. Granted, because he gets just as much work, if not, more in the red zone at times for Nevada. Let me pull up my trusty handy dandy rushing report here for you guys. So Tawa, he has 59% of the carries. Devontae Lee 31%. But when you get into, I don't have the red zone stuff in front of me. I should have gotten that beforehand. Lee's getting a pretty decent amount of work in the red zone. Total carry 77 to 40. So Tawa's getting that, between the 20s work, and then things kind of changed there in the red zone. But it was 19 carries to 13, 18 to 5, 24 to 13, and 16 to 9. So the gap isn't that wide as you might think. Nevada did play in week 0, I remember. All right, at wide receiver for Nevada, it gets even worse when you have the options of OK State cast off Shane Illingworth and Nate Cox, who I think is okay. He's actually backed up Carson Strong for a couple of years. Like, he knows what to do. Things are tough. Jamal Bell leads the team with targets with 30. They do have BJ Castile second on the team in targets and 20. If that name sounds familiar, if you're a hardcore Pac-12 fan, he toiled around Arizona for a couple of years, had a couple 300-plus yard receiving, years, not horrible. 8 catches on those 20 targets for 97 yards and a touchdown. Bell has caught 17 of his 30 for 122. Then you have Toa. This is where his value comes into play because he gets targeted a lot. He's third on the team with 14 targets, 11 catches for 88 yards and a touchdown. So even though he's losing 30 to 40% of the carries to Devontae Lee, he's getting way more passing work than him. Lee has 5 catches on 7 targets for 47 yards. Tawa again, 14 targets. So it's worth paying up for if you can afford it because of that passing game work. And it's just the fact that the receivers can't get open. The quarterbacks don't make any reads, and they just need to get rid of the ball in 3 seconds. Tawa is standing there ready for that 2-yard catch, coach. So that's where we stand with the Nevada side. I think that, Castile at 5'5" and Bell at 5'1" are just okay. You have their WR3 Delvin Campbell at 4'8". He's got 14 targets, 8 catches, 112 yards. He was basically a non-factor in week 0 and week 1, but against Incarnate Word, he had 8 targets, and against Iowa, he had 5. So, starting to trend up a little bit, but still just the WR3 there as far as I'm concerned, and at 4'8", really not all that much more playable than Jamal Bell, at least in my opinion. All right, let's see. We got some questions here. All right, I can't help you with the NFL stuff because I'm not the NFL guy. I can't say that. Let's see. I bet Braden knows. Kyle Pitt. Here, let's say it out loud. Kyle Pitts and Leonard Fournette. This guy wants Mike Evans, 35 yards per point, passing touchdown, 7 points, blah, 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 8-man league. Are you trolling me? Sure. Yeah, make the deal, man. All right. Do you think Brad Roberts is too expensive for a high stakes build? Well, I'm going to have to see ownership because at first I thought he was going to be really highly owned, but as we're working through this slate and I see even the options in UTEP Boise State, like he's going to be sub 50%. So he's definitely fadeable. And then you have the, randomness with touchdowns with Eldridge there. If Kinnaman plays, I like that idea of fading a lot more if Kinnaman and Hughes are in because they're going to pilfer work and have touchdown opportunities as well. So he's definitely a fadeable guy there because of that 8.4 price point. feels maybe more of a GPP-ish play, because looking at the build and how it's going to work out, unless you're going to jam a bunch of Nevada value, which doesn't sound very fun, I don't think you're going to be able to get Robertson in your lineup and feel good about it. All right, Boise State versus UTEP. I want UTEP to be good. I keep losing money on them because they have these advantageous lines, and they have another advantageous line here. They're plus 16 against Boise State at home, 45.5 total. Like, they got to be able to cover that. Gavin Hardison, Ronald Awatt, and Tyron Smith, like, they're better than what they're looking. I don't know what's going on with Gavin Hardison. I thought he was going to take a step this year. That hasn't happened. He's looked really quite poor, and his pass attempts are massive. 48, 45. The game they actually won, he had just a 27. Go figure. They actually ran the ball really well that game against New Mexico State, but he's throwing the ball at a very high rate because they're falling behind, and I could see Boise State get out in front. Boise State's offense is a little stagnant as well, but Hardison's just throwing interceptions like crazy that game against New Mexico. I never thought they would lose that game, to be honest. So really tough to get behind Hardison as an actual play. Even though there have been weeks in the past where he's lit up opposing defenses and put up a decent 25 fantasy point score. I just don't know if those days are here anymore. At running back, they're super cheap. They're actually almost way too cheap to fade, even in a matchup against Boise State where maybe the game script is a little negative. Ronald Awatt at 3.5 is phenomenal. I don't care even if it is a bad game script. Like, I got to get me some Ronald Awatt there. Looking at it, Reynaldo Flores has played, really quite well, but he's actually a receiver. So you have him as a running back. I don't know what's going on with these slates. They're putting running backs as wide receivers and wide receivers as running backs. So it's kind of sucks having to burn a wide receiver spot on a running back, but Reynaldo Flores has been playing quite well, and at 3.2, he makes a lot of sense. But anyways, as the running backs go, Ronald Awatt at 3.5, yes, 2 weeks ago he had 21 carries. Game before that, 10. You see the bad game script has definitely hurt him because wedged in on, the other side of that 23, he has a 3.5 and a 4.7. But Jesus, the 3.5 is just such a tasty price for him. It's really tough to get away from. And there is the fact that Deion Hankins is getting more and more healthy and getting, he had 8 carries, 4 carries, 7. Does a little bit of the passing work, and he's also really cheap at 3.8. I do prefer Awatt, but Hankins is just as good an option there, and I think either one of those guys could end up panning out, especially in a script where they'll have to, probably throw the ball to their running backs a little bit more with that Boise State defense. But 3.5 Ronald Awatt, there's a value spot that you can definitely exploit and do well with. Tyron Smith at 5.4, major chalk. That's just silly. Tyron Smith against anyone has basically become matchup proof. He is taking that Jacob Cowing role in the offense. That's something that we during the first UTEP slate of the year really kind of harped on. That's, this guy's going to get targeted a lot. The Jacob Cowing role in this offense is extremely valuable, and he has been so far. Through 4 games with the team, 56 targets, 27 catches, 435 yards, and 2 touchdowns. You can really count on him to get the ball thrown his way a minimum of 8 times. But look at this, 15 targets, 12 targets, 12, 17, just crushing it. 8 for 181 last week. Is that what it was? Yeah. So Tyron Smith, a very obvious play. 5.4. They missed the buck here. I don't know what that price is. That's a really silly price. So I think that you could get a little cute by running the WR2 Flores at a running back spot, because he's going to get targeted. He's actually second on the team in targets. He's actually had some pretty big games. He has a 38 targets, 22 catches, 272. Let me pull up this one against North Texas. So 10 targets, 8 catches for 122, but he had 7 for 76 against Oklahoma, which was a pretty solid outing for him. Kind of tailed off there, but he has 19 targets in the last 2 games alone. So those 2 guys are going to get peppered. There's going to be a lot of passing attempts in general. It's just they're not a lot of good options. They do have Walter Don back, who has been injured for a long time, was a WR1 at one point, 6 catches on 9 targets for 30 yards. If you think that, he's suddenly going to wake up and rise out and play well, you have him at 3-4. But this UTEP team's clearly a spot where we're going to be able to target value and the best against a Boise State team, where this total is probably not going to turn out to be all that well. Tyron Smith actually had 8 for 83. PFF lied to me. They have his stats as 181. All right. For the Boise State side, I think that you could, if you don't want to game stack quarterbacks from Syracuse, Virginia, then Bachmeier is okay at 7-3. That's my ringing endorsement for Hank Bachmeier. I haven't been super excited about him pretty much ever. I know there were times in the past where people were gung-ho about him, and he'd have a breakout game or two, but he mainly is just a 15 to 17 fantasy point game guy, and he hasn't even really been doing that this year. In games that they've handily won, he's been right around 13 to 15. And a game they struggled against Oregon State where he was awful and got benched at times and had an injury, he had -2.5 fantasy points. So I don't know if I can justify playing 7-3 Hank Bachmeier, even though the matchup against UTEP is advantageous. Everybody and their mom wants to see Taylon Green. He will be the future of this team at the quarterback position. And he should probably be getting it now. That Oregon State game where he scored 30 and rushed for 102 was amazing. He should be on the field. I think Bachmeier is getting the royalty treatment. He's been with the program a long time through thick and thin, so they're staying loyal to him, and you like to see that. But at what point do you just say, hey, man, this kid behind you is better, and we need to win games? So I think if he comes out flat or UTEP has a lead at halftime, we might see Taylon Green if you want to go with that GPP stuff. At running back, George Holani is another guy who's been with the team for a long time. At 6'6", that's probably your high dollar guy that you were asking about. Brad Roberts, if you want to go down, you're going to save almost $2K. Braden, you can get 6'6" Holani and a guy who's going to get a whole lot of touches. Somewhere between 18 to 25, and he's also getting plenty of passing work, 4 catches, 3. That kind of work for sub 7K is just really important. And I think that, switching focus with the amount of committee backfields that we're seeing and lack of bell cows, switching your focus to getting a running back that is going to contribute in the passing game is just such a big edge as opposed to people who are still thinking in a more traditional way of my running back's got to get 30 carries a game. Whereas 15 carries is fine if he's getting targeted 5 to 6 times. So really got to switch gears there. Holani is 4th on the team in targets with 12, has caught 11 of them for 96 and 2 touchdowns. He's going to get 3 to 4 catches. That's just what he's going to do. So Holani is that kind of RB2 guy, I think, for me at least, looking at this slate and saving a little bit of money. The second back, Ashton Jeanty, he's had 22 carries in the last 2 games. He's getting enough work to be considered. 8 catches in 3 games. So definitely a guy that at 4.9, if you want to get a little bit, sneaky for way less ownership, I think that makes sense. More of a GPP guy for me. I don't want to play both backs certainly, but if you want to play the, Holani's going to be kept out of the end zone, then you want to play Ashton Jeanty. He's a guy that can definitely, hit 15 to 17 fantasy points, or if not more, in this particular game environment against this UTEP team that I just don't know what the hell they're doing. At wide receiver, Stephen Cobbs, Billy Bowens, Davis Cotter, who's their kind of short yardage guy, and then Latrell Caples. Cobbs at 6'5", kind of obvious. I'd like to save that money with Latrell Caples. I was a little slower to the party on Caples. Didn't really come around to him as much, but if you look at the target share in 3 games, Cobbs 17, Billy Bowens 15, and Latrell Caples 14. 10 catches for 93 yards, 2 touchdowns for Latrell, 6 catches for 67 yards for Billy, and Stephen 7 for 72 and a touch. So it doesn't really, for me, justify paying up the extra $1,300 for Cobbs when the target share is essentially the same, the touchdown equity is the same, and Caples is just getting more of the deep balls or more of the actual work. He's also getting carries. He's, got a couple carries in the last 3 games as well. So, Boise State, Khalil Shakir, they're looking for that spot. He was a guy that would get all the passing work, a lot of running work. Just they put the ball in Shakir's hands. See out in Buffalo now. I know they haven't been using him, but in the preseason, he looked great. He's just a major weapon in this offense. It can support a receiver like that. And I think that, a lot of us thought, myself included, it would be Stephen Cobbs, but I think he's just better suited for that WR2 role, and moving Latrell Caples up to the Shakir spot has been kind of paying off lately. The first game he was kind of just mediocre, but they all were against Oregon State, against New Mexico. He was solid, scored 2 touchdowns with 2 catches. And then you saw his target share last week against Tennessee Martin, where, 4 catches, 48 yards, had a carry. Didn't score any touchdowns, but just the fact that he's getting those touches. So he's my favorite of the group in terms of, pass catchers, if I want to go with anyone besides just a running back for this particular team. All right, so that is that particular slate. At quarterback core, Schrader just goes without saying, but I'm gonna core Brendan Armstrong. He owes us. I think he bounces back in a big way. I think ownership wise, at least I hope, people are going to be a little gun shy about him. Maybe they're going to look to run a little bit of, 4 running back lineups perhaps, or maybe they take a shot with a Hank Bachmeier because of the name, which I'd love. If people play Schrader and Hank Bachmeier, I think we're going to have a massive slate because Brendan Armstrong is going to score 30 plus fantasy points against Syracuse. Mark it down. Second member of the core at running back it's got to be Sean Tucker. Just pay up that 9-1. You can get away from Roberts. You have Helani, you have Tawa, you have a good secondary RB2 option between those two, and then you can go down and use one of the UTEP backs for value pretty easily. And then at wide receiver, Tyron Smith at 5'4", no-brainer, right? Braden says running Helani, Tucker, and Awatt at running back. Yep, I think that is the move. That's definitely going to be a profitable move that I think people will come around to, but not enough will. I think Awatt's going to be under-owned for what this particular slate is. All right, PrizePicks. Let's go. A better week on PrizePicks last week. We're shooting for the stars here. We're going to have it even better. Looking at these numbers, Darren Granger's passing yardage is set at 215.5 passing yards. That's simply too low. This is going to be an offensive shootout type of game. We've already seen Granger in games where they've had to play catch up or their offense is just flowing. He's throwing for 250 plus. So 215.5 passing yards is downright disrespectful for Darren Granger. Garrett Schrader at 212.5 passing yards. I'll take the over there. There's danger and risk of him hitting like 190 because of his rushing, but I think 220 is a good baseline for him typically for passing yardage. So looking at that, I'm going to give you guys the early PrizePick stuff on the main slate as well, because there are a couple that I've identified that are going to probably move up by Saturday. So if you play PrizePicks, you're going to want to get in that early and often before it does. I also really like the Tucker Gregg rushing number, which is 60.5. There is potential there for him to get like 15 a touch, but I think Tucker Gregg's over 60.5 rushing yards, so I'm all over that. And then the Sean Tucker over 103.5 rushing yards. His prop is one that I featured in my betting article. It's 105.5 on DraftKings. This Virginia rush defense is just putrid. I don't know how many ways I can say it. I don't know how many ways I can prove it to you, but Sean Tucker is going to rush for 130 yards at minimum. Let's see. And then receiving, let's see what they got Tyron Smith at, because I had it. But all right, so 84.5 yards for him. It's usually the reception number for Tyron Smith. He made us a bunch of money. They had him at 3.5 back in week 0. We hit the over. Anytime he's listed at 5.5 receptions or less, you slam the over. Thankfully, PrizePicks has thrown us a layup and made Tyron Smith's receptions number at 5. So we're going over 5 receptions for him as well. All right, so those are the early games. I want to get here to the main slate games so you guys have a chance to put these in. I am going to enter them into the tracker tonight as well. Hopefully I didn't lose too much yardage or numbers, because there were some really juicy ones that I'm afraid are going to move up before Saturday. So we got to get them in. Davis Brin over 270.5. This Tulsa offense is just been amazing. They're scoring at will. They're throwing the ball done. They're running decently. They're playing Ole Miss, the Rebels. You would expect that, the Rebels are defensively, they're going to be able to stifle them. But they'll go up, right? Their running game will be able to do some stuff, and Tulsa's going to have to throw the ball. Looking at Davis Brin, they lost an overtime game to Wyoming 40-37. In that one, Brin threw for 460 yards and 3 touchdowns, over 50 attempts. Against Northern Illinois, they won 38-35, over 30 attempts, 322 yards and 4 touchdowns. And then against the mighty Jacksonville State Gamecocks, they won 54-17. You think, it's a blowout game. Davis Brin wouldn't be asked to throw the ball. He threw it 35 times, 424 yards and 4 touchdowns. Davis Brin is a massive walking 300 plus in this offense. Why PrizePicks wanted to dangle 270.5 to us is beyond me. Slam that over. That is like just lock city. AU's going to have to be injured to not pay that off. So I'm all over that one. Bringing it over to the rushing yards here. We took a couple of losses. The Brown number was good. We took a couple losses though because Grant, got phased out of the game plan. And Charbonnet didn't have the game that we thought. But there is a couple of rushing numbers here. Let me scroll down here that I really feel good about. I'm actually shocked that they started this low, and I'm curious. I don't think they'll stay at this level. Okay, so Rocket Sanders is going up against Texas A&M, a better defense than they've seen, but Rocket Sanders has been over 110 rushing yards in multiple games. They played 3. The game against South Carolina, which is their Missouri 2021 level bad. In that game, he rushed for 156 yards on 24 attempts. Going against Cincinnati, a tougher Cincinnati team, 20 carries, 117 yards. So that defensive Cincinnati, they're kind of on the level there of what Arkansas would see going in against this one. And then Missouri State, which kind of pushed them, he rushed for 167 yards. So, going up against a Texas A&M team, I'd say their defense is, obviously quite good, at least on par with Cincinnati for what we think of a run-stopping defense. 80.5 rushing yards is just way too low. I think they're weighing the matchup way too hard, considering what the workload that Rocket Sanders is going to get and how that defense is going to try to stop KJ Jefferson, right? So that number 80.5 feels ridiculous to me. I'm not sure what they're doing there. They had Deuce Vaughn. He's going up against Oklahoma, 83.5 rushing yards. He had a really rough game against Tulane. They lost that game. Like him for the bounce back, over 83.5. Typically, anytime he's under 100, I want to slam the over, regardless of matchup. It's just too appealing. And then over here on the receiving yards, Keelan Stokes was at 69.5 receiving yards. Going, if I think Davis Brin's going to throw for 300 plus, and he will, it makes sense that his WR1 would be the main bend factor. And see, they've already raised it. Damn it. So they got Keelan Stokes at 75.5. I did talk about it a little bit. I didn't get it in the tracker, so I can't claim the 69.5, which is unfortunate. That 75.5 receiving number for Keelan Stokes is going to reach 80 plus by Saturday. So you want to get that in. The 69.5 obviously was a better number. I don't expect to see 75.5 on the board for very much longer. This is why I want to start getting these to you guys by Tuesday night, Wednesday at the latest, so that you can get these numbers in, because PrizePicks is doing a hell of a job of getting these numbers fixed and highlighted beforehand. A couple of bonus ones. Skylar Bell over 29.5 receiving yards. He had 100 plus, kind of his breakout party last week. Going against Ohio State, they'll have to throw the ball. Obviously, they have Braylon Allen, and at quarterback, that with Graham Mertz, nobody's going to respect him. But he's adequate enough to where he could support Skylar Bell, who is a top-notch wide receiver in the Big Ten, in my opinion, for 30-plus yards. So 29.5 there. Evan Hull, over 37.5 receiving yards. Evan Hull has been phenomenal. I do the Twitter thread where I talk about top performances from each week, and Evan Hull has been a mainstay in my Twitter threads that I do. I was really impressed in the Duke game, which they lost because they always lose, right? He rushed for 85 yards. That's great. But he caught 14 passes for 213 yards in that game. And you think, okay, that's an anomaly. He's not usually a pass catcher like that. He caught another 8 passes for 33 yards last week. So the target share is coming to him in droves. He rushed for 124 as well. But he's just been doing a lot. Rushed for over 100 in week 0 against Nebraska. He caught 5 passes for 55 yards. So he's featuring heavily. Ryan Helinski is really targeting him a lot in the passing game, and that element of his game has really kind of stepped up and made him a top-notch fantasy option, and people really don't consider him. So over 37.5 receiving yards for Evan Hull, I think, 40 plus with the amount of targets he's seeing is just way too advantageous. I don't know how we don't slam that and take it all the way to the bank, right? I don't think my Huskies are on the board yet, so we'll have to wait until tomorrow's show for me to talk about that. And then with Jake, we'll have a bunch more prize picks to really talk about and get in there for you guys. If you really want to believe in the Evan Hull running plus receiving yards, which I do, they have his number at 132.5 for the combined rushing plus receiving yards. Rush for 100, right? You could do that against Miami, Ohio, and then catch 35 yards. So I will definitely be on that. And that Deuce Vaughn number over 100.5 rushing plus receiving yards. So some really soft numbers that are all going to be high by the end when it's all said and done. So if you're a prize picks player, get over there and enter those ASAP. Betting wise, I have a couple that I want to talk about, and then we'll get out of here. I know it's late for some of you guys, and I got to get ready for Thursday or the Saturday main slate and work. Yeah. My sleep schedule is so messed up. But such is life until we win the two guns $1 million, right? All right. So I'm really high on this Sean Tucker number, the 105.5 rushing yards. This is one I think we're going to be able to slam the over and get back on the right side of profitability on our prop betting. So Sean Tucker over 105.5. As far as game lines go, I'm a really big fan, go figure, of the Washington Huskies. As a lot of you might know, they were minus 13.5. I did feature them in the free article bet write-up that I had released earlier today at minus 13.5 on DraftKings. Going against the Stanford Cardinal, a lot of the reason why is the fact that Stanford, I think, is going to find life difficult and hard to score. E.J. Smith is going to be out. Their talented running back, Emmitt Smith lineage, has scored. He's been their receiving leader. He's been their rushing leader. Not having him is going to be really tough for the offense. They're going to have to rely on Tanner McKee. And the Huskies defense has been relatively stout. They did start to fall apart in the second half, and I think they just got a little tired. So Peyton Thorne throwing a bunch just wore them out and kind of made that game a little more respectable than it was. It was never in doubt. Huskies just owned the Spartans from the minute that game started. I like them to cover by 2 touchdowns pretty easily at home. They've had a really favorable schedule with all these home games. Getting Stanford without E.J. Smith is another gift. Minus 13.5. You can take that one all the way to the bank with Sean Tucker over 105.5 rushing yards. And then I'll have a bunch more that I load up in the tracker, but I really feel like this Georgia Tech versus – I'll give you a total as well. This Georgia Tech versus UCF game, it's a total of 56. Georgia Tech is capable of putting up a 0. I don't think they will against UCF, but that UCF offense – they can hang a 40 spot on Tech. We can get, 17 from Georgia Tech. So I like the over 56 there. John Rice Plumlee. In my Twitter thread, I just typed John Rice Plumlee. That's it. He had a big game last week. He's an offensive weapon. He's a Jake Kuchek favorite. I like that total over 56. So that gives you a game line or a spread, a total, and a prop to play early on. Check out that betting article from earlier. Check out tomorrow's slate breakdown. For the rest of the week, there will be a show tomorrow, 8 p.m., covering that Saturday main slate. Q&A session Saturday morning at 8 a.m. PST. That's where you guys can ask me, this or that questions, any last-minute lineup stuff, betting information, prize picks, any of those kind of questions. I'll be there. I'll update you on any of my evolving thoughts, my cores, any injury news, and then articles out for the rest of the week, tomorrow, Friday, and Saturday for all of the slates. Appreciate it. Thank you guys, as always. Been great. Thank you for continuing to support the show. And let's keep making some money, and let's take down some tournaments this weekend. It's, we're heading into conference play. I think it's time for us to really kind of put our foot on the neck of our opponents and finish strong. So thanks, guys. Back tomorrow night. Be there. See ya.